I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my unwavering co-host, Brett.
Hello, Alice. Well, it's finally official. Murder is legal in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Murder is legal if you can afford to throw everyone else under the bus, people to pay for you. And there is not always justice in the court system, which shouldn't be news to people who like to follow true crime, because obviously we have a whole segment of true crime that's looking at wrongful convictions. What you hear less of is wrongful acquittals.
Yeah, but they happen. And Alice has made a really good point in the past, which I just thought was brilliant. I'd never really thought of. But it's such a paradigm shift, and I've now stolen this point and made it in various other podcasts, that question about if you were accused of a crime, what attorney would you want? And you said, I wouldn't want an attorney. I'd want a really good documentarian or a really good publicist. And it's true. In today's day and age, money can buy good attorneys, and obviously Karen Reed had very good attorneys. But what was far more important in this case was the media apparatus that she had. And whether you think it was AstroTurf that turned into grassroots, or was always grassroots, or was grassroots supported by various talking heads, either way, it was incredibly effective. And I think it laid the groundwork for it made it much more difficult if you were ever going to get a conviction, because you came in, and I think we all knew this, somewhat behind the eight ball. We all hoped that you would have a jury who knew nothing about this case. I think, frankly, some of the jury questions, which we can talk about, indicated that that wasn't true. And I don't know if it was possible to not know anything. I think it was more, could you put aside what you knew, then you didn't know anything. And that always makes it harder.
And for those of you who may not have been following or think we're overstating the fact of this media apparatus, all day today, I had to work during the day, while there was verdict watch. As soon as the verdict came down, I was getting text messages from friends all over the country, a lot of friends who did not follow true crime, who were sending me pictures their friends were sending them wearing FKR hats in tennis outfits on tennis courts at their country club that probably cost six figures to be a part of, and cheering on the fact that that's happening. They're nowhere near the Commonwealth. A lot of these people were in Texas. I'm not throwing Texas under the bus. I love Texas. But we are talking about people who have completely lost sight of the fact that there is a man who is dead, and no one should be cheering the fact that justice has not been done today. And people who have truly fallen into this is like watching a sports match, right? This was like true crime Super Bowl or something, except when you're watching sports, those are not people's real lives. It is a game. Ultimately, it is a game. This is not a game. And it's not just not a game for John O'Keefe and his family. It has not been a game for the 30, 40, 50 people whose lives have been upended because of this media apparatus, directed or, encouraged and adopted full form by the defense, of being part of a conspiracy that there is just no proof of, and their lives will forever be changed. And we have truly entered a different realm of the judicial system that now crosses over from entertainment to real life. And we should all be a bit wary of what this means for our own lives.
Oh, by the way, Karen Reed was acquitted. I don't know if we said that. If you didn't know that, then I don't know why you're here.
We're here today.
But, yeah, she was convicted of DUI and got a year probation.
Which is a lesser included crime. Right.
So as the jury is deliberating, and they took, I guess, 20 hours. I forget exactly how much time it was, but over into Friday, all day Monday, all day Tuesday, and then today, Wednesday, I think today's Wednesday, they came back after lunch and had a verdict. And you saw sort of crowds growing outside of the courthouse, and they were all people supporting Karen Reed. They had their FKR shirts on, Free Karen Reed. And you had people, including people on things like Court TV, that were saying things like, there just aren't a whole lot of supporters here for John O'Keefe and the family or for the Commonwealth. And it's like, what are you even talking about? Like, is that how we should be deciding this? If more people had shown up for the Commonwealth, would we all of a sudden say, well, I mean, I don't know. Now the Commonwealth has more supporters. So, this should affect something. It was very strange, this notion of how much support does one side have or the other at the courthouse is some tangible thing to be considered when weighing the evidence in the case.
And people who have been just watching it on TV, a lot of people are like, well, of course, the jury was completely insulated from the media. You guys, that would be a very idealistic world. But there are people outside the courthouse all day. Not only that, someone said this, maybe it was you, Brett, at some point. There have been so many of these updates, I've kind of lost track. But in a real world, and we've said this about Adnan, for example, as well. You know who are the scarier people to be against? It would be the FKR rather than you and me, right? I know what the truth is. I know what the evidence has shown. I know what the prosecution has been able to show through the evidence. And if you disagree with me, like, I think you're wrong, but I'm not going to come and attack you personally, go for straw man, go for your children, do those sorts of things. But that's why it's kind of easy to disagree with me, which, by the way, is the kind of society we want. You want disagreement when it's based in truth and based in rational thought to be available to people. I don't win an agreement because I threaten you into seeing things my way, or worse, you don't see things my way, but I threaten you into silence. And that is a real problem here, because I do think there was a very loud contingency, and people online, we've heard from people who said that they're afraid to speak out in terms of what they see to be pretty obvious. Looks like a hit and run, like why are we having this huge long debate? But they won't say that, because the second they do, as Brett's infamous tweet now says, all you have to do is barely mention Karen Reed, and the people come out to attack you, not attack your viewpoint or have a debate with you, but to just attack you in every way, shape, and form.
And the number of people I've had who have sent me messages saying something along the lines of, I don't know how you do it on Karen Reed. I said one tweet and got just completely attacked. I don't care is how I do it. Like, none of that matters to me. It doesn't matter at all. I mean, that's just engagement for me, frankly. I mean, we have a podcast. Engagement's important. When some lunatic is posting about me and, and so all of a sudden my tweet has 100,000 views, that's not a negative for me. And I don't care what they say. But the average person who's out there, they get dogpiled on Twitter, and they're terrified. They don't want any part of that. They're afraid of what it could mean. Is this person going to dox me? Is this person going to start calling my job? What's going to happen? And I totally understand that. And it shouldn't be that way. And this case was particularly heated, and it had some personalities driving it who were particularly vitriolic and willing to do that kind of stuff. But, I mean, the problem, and we've said this before, this is a case that is tragic in isolation. It's tragic that a man lost his life and he's not going to get justice. And I just want to point out for everybody out there, because I saw some people say things like, well, now the Commonwealth can reinvestigate and they'll find the real killers. That's not going to happen, guys. This case is over, okay? The Commonwealth believes that they have the real killer, barring, a tape showing up of Chloe attacking John. They're not going to reinvestigate. The case is over. So you need to understand that is the first thing. But this case is tragic in that he will never get justice, whatever you think justice is. But I think one of the bigger issues, and something we're all going to have to grapple with going forward, is this was effective. It was a very effective way to turn what should have been a very straightforward hit and run case into a cause célèbre and ride that into an acquittal. And I think you're just going to see more and more of this, particularly with people who have a little bit of means, where they're setting this up going in, that they're going to have this kind of media operation on their side. Now, you can't always do that. Karen Reed, to some extent, caught lightning in a bottle. People will try and redo what she did. Most of them will fail. But this is a playbook that you will see run again and again and again.
And let's be very clear, for those of you who may be disappointed that justice wasn't done today, I know plenty of you are celebrating, and like I said, we can have a reasonable discussion. But let's be very clear about something. The prosecution proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury, we've always said, gets to deliberate in a black box. Jury nullification is a real thing. I don't I'm not sure this was jury nullification. I'll explain later. But just because there has been acquittal does not equal that's the truth, right? The truth is that she never hit him, that there's a conspiracy of 30 plus people who have covered up a murder of a fellow police officer. Those two things do not equate. That's why when we talk in legal speak, and we do this when we cover other cases, in wrongful conviction cases, in rightful conviction cases, we don't say that someone's innocent. We say that they've not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But we oftentimes, and we say this in our investigations a lot, when we may not pursue an indictment, we can choose not to pursue an indictment, or we can choose not to pursue a prosecution, but we still believe that we have the right person. We just may not have the evidence to back it up. I think the evidence was there in this case. I just want people to be very clear, because a lot of people are like, haha, prosecutors podcast, see, you were wrong. This doesn't change my mind as to what happened that night. I think Arca's video described to us exactly what happened that night. I think Karen Reed's own words on national television told us exactly what happened that night. Now, the acquittal for the murder 2 charge does not mean that she was not responsible for his death. It does not mean that there is a conspiracy that we're not get to uncover. That is not the case here. So if any of you are thinking, well, maybe I was wrong in terms of how I interpreted the evidence, how I saw the ARCA video, the ARCA being the expert for the defense, where in fact the hand of a person, John, can in fact shatter a taillight at the speed that her black box shows she was going, and that he could have survived but for being left out there, fleeing the scene, not providing help. I think that's all been proven. And so if you're thinking, well, how did I guess I'm wrong and I shouldn't trust my own instincts of how I view the evidence for the future. Truth does not necessarily equal justice. And as you can hear, baby Allison is crying because he too feels injustice done today.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I think Alice and I both said that one of the points I think is definitely worth making is this doesn't change reality. This is a legal decision by the jury. Karen Reed is not guilty of this murder. She will be not guilty for all time. Double jeopardy has attached. There is nothing that could ever happen where she could be retried for this. Just to be clear, nothing, zero, nada, nothing. It's over. Right? We've already had people asking if they found out the jury had been tampered with. No, she could be charged with jury tampering, but she can't be charged with this. She is forever acquitted of this crime. But it doesn't change what happened that night. Whatever happened that night is the truth. And the Commonwealth will believe, and I will always believe, as Hank Brennan so aptly put it, she was drunk, she hit him, and she left him to die. That's what I'll always believe because that's what the evidence says. Now, Alice is right. Now, look, this is important to remember. Our entire legal system is designed so that guilty people will occasionally go free. That is the way it works. And it's not good enough that I think it's beyond a reasonable doubt, or Alice does. It has to be the jury that reaches that conclusion of 12 people who you hope go in with no bias, with no preconceived notions, who are simply weighing the evidence and making a decision. And different people can believe different things about reasonable doubt. It is not some sort of scientific standard. I think, honestly, a lot of people don't understand reasonable doubt. I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback Hank Brennan at all because I thought he did an incredible job. I think he did the best possible job you could do on this case. I don't think any other prosecutor could have done a better job. And so I just don't think this jury ever would have convicted. I kind of think the last jury might have, if Brennan had been there, but who knows, right? But one thing I think Brennan couldn't do is teach those jurors in the little time he had what reasonable doubt is. And I'll just give you an example of that. There are so many people who, because the Commonwealth could not say exactly how John was hit, well, that's reasonable doubt. If we don't know exactly how he was hit, that's reasonable doubt. And I want you to think about that for a second. Think about a no-body murder. A woman goes missing. The police go in, her bed is bloody, her husband is standing next to the bed covered in blood. They never find her body. They never find a murder weapon. They don't know how it happened. They don't know if she was shot, stabbed, beaten to death. They have no idea. But they have enough evidence to know she's dead and he killed her. And that was a similar situation here. Because of the way the strike happened, they couldn't tell you exactly how John was standing or exactly what his position was or exactly what happened when he was hit. But what they could prove is, number one, a strike absolutely could do all the things we see and could deposit all the evidence we see deposited. And we see that evidence. We see the taillights in the yard. We see the taillights in his shirt. We see his phone not moving. We see the battery getting colder. and colder. We see the hair on the bumper. We see her shattered taillight. We hear her saying, the voicemail she left and her interviews where she says, I know I said I hit him, and people saying she said, I hit him. And the fact that she was so drunk, and you can put all that together and you don't have any reasonable doubt that she did it. But I don't think that's how this jury looked at it. I think they looked at it as, they can't tell us how this happened. How can we be sure she did it? And maybe there was an FKR on the jury. This morning, I thought there definitely was. Now I'm not so sure. I think it might have just been 12 people who couldn't get there because they heard her say, I was drunk, right? And they found her guilty of DUI because she absolutely admitted to being drunk that night. Now, it took them a lot longer to reach that conclusion than they should have, but nevertheless, they got there, but they could not get to she killed him.
And I think their third jury question kind of highlights that fact. The question I'm thinking of is when they asked are the videos of Karen Reed talking evidence? The answer is yes. Question 2. The answer is yes. And the reason I think that highlights the way they were essentially overthinking this is, first of all, let's just say there was a world where it wasn't evidence. It was absolutely evidence, a statement of a party opponent, and you're not shown anything to the jury that isn't evidence, okay? The only times that it's not evidence is when you have argument, and they clearly say that. It's in the jury instructions. The judge says, now we'll be closing arguments. These are the arguments of the attorneys, but you need to weigh, what you remember the witnesses said about evidence. She clearly said those things, and they were trying to draw this fine line of well, we heard her say, I hit him, and we hear her say all these things, and they were clearly hearing what she said, and then they had to be like, okay, I heard that rationally. That's the defendant who I'm supposed to be passing judgment on telling me exactly what happened. Ooh, am I allowed to believe that? Am I allowed to listen to that for purposes of this tally chart I'm doing? It's not jury nullification. I don't think so. I think they were truly trying to understand, how can we possibly know? It was cold. They used solo cups. It was snowing. Maybe I can imagine in this room, there were a lot of conversations of, there's a world where that could have happened. That's not reasonable doubt. And we have done many voir dires with people who say that specific thing, and those are the first people we strike because you're not ever going to change their minds. Those are the people who they can see the weather alert that it's raining outside, and someone comes in with an umbrella that's wet, and the person is wet, and they have galoshes on, and they're tracking, rainwater all through the hallway, and then they hear thunder even, and they smell rain, and they're like, I don't feel the rain on my skin right now, so I don't know that it's raining, so no, it's not raining.
Could have been Michael Proctor with a bucket.
Exactly. You guys may think that I'm being exaggerating, but that is a lot of people's view about reasonable doubt. And it's not in the minority. I would say, I'm just going to pull a number out of the air. I'm not talking it's 1% of people or less than 1%. There are jury voir dires, jury panels where we're questioning about 60, 70 individuals. And sometimes they're very educated people with college degrees, and they even watch true crime and listen to true crime. And 10% of them are like, I don't know, man. If I didn't see it happen, it didn't happen. And even if I saw it happen, I've heard from television that you can't really trust your eyes. So even if I see it, I know I can't trust my eyes. So you're right. I could never convict guilty.
Look,
we have heard that before.
I've heard YouTubers say, well, I wasn't there, so I can't be sure. It's that's the standard. And we get that. That gets repeated sometimes. I see people say that. I'm like, wait a second. That's your standard? You weren't there, so you can't be sure? How are we ever going to convict anybody?
And it's a changing goalpost. That's the point, because we have this within, we pivot within our questioning, even within the voir dire. Okay, well, let's put yourself out there, and you'll see that they're never going to get there. It's not that there's one piece of evidence that will get them there. We will ask them questions like, well, what if you're standing in the rain and you see the umbrella and you see the rain coming down and you feel it on your own skin? They're like, what if it was a Hollywood script that was it was like Truman Show? Again, I've heard someone say, what if this is just the Truman Show? And so you see how it's a shifting sort of goalpost. In other words, you'll never reach the goalpost. Ultimately, what that potential juror is saying is, I could never convict.
And I'll say this. I do think if there was one mistake the Commonwealth made, it was not conceding murder to and leaving the scene before this trial. And I understand why they didn't. Number one, because it's always fun to beat the defense, and they did. They beat him at every level on that. But I was finally convinced of murder too during Hank Brennan's close. He did a great job of laying out exactly how it's clear that she knew what she was doing when she did it. They did a great job of arguing that. But it was a difficult thing to show. And frankly, I don't know if any of this would have mattered with this jury. But nevertheless, let me just continue on this. It was always more difficult to show intent, particularly because she'd been drinking so much. And you kind of wonder, if you had not been distracted by trying to show intent, is it possible you could have made a better argument? And I'll give you an example. If all you were going for was drunken manslaughter, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? Is actually much more powerful because it goes to the entire argument you're trying to make. You're not trying to split hairs between did I hit him and I hit him. Then you're saying, look, she was so drunk she didn't even remember. But we can say she hit him because we've got the data, we've got what happened in that vehicle, et cetera, et cetera. And I wonder if, because they were trying to improve intent so intently, if that made it a little bit harder to do this more straightforward argument for manslaughter.
One other thing I'll note, and none of us are in that jury room, but both of us have polled juries before. We've talked to jurors after the fact if they want to talk to us. When I clerked, we as the law clerks would get to talk to the juries afterwards. They really like talking to us law clerks because they're educating us. Is do not underestimate the power of one or two very strong personalities. I don't mean, again, an FKR person on the jury pool. I'm saying 8 or 9 people who are like, meh, okay. All you need is 1, 2, or 3 people who have very strong views about what we just said. Let's say most people actually understand reasonable doubt in that room, but you have 1 or 2 people who are making that argument that I just said. Everyone's trying to convince them, like, well, what if you're standing in the rain? And they're like, it's a Truman Show, it's a Truman Show, it's a Truman Show. How do you know it's not the Truman Show? Did you watch the news? Are aliens real? Is the government lying to us? Are vaccines real? You can see how all these arguments, by the way, this is not meant to be a political argument. I'm saying this is how the arguments then get made in that room. And all of a sudden you're browbeaten because you're like, I don't know. I was here for the trial, for the evidence, but now you're bringing in politics and you're bringing in medicine. And I actually don't know all those things, but you sound like you know a lot. So, okay, I'm going to follow along because you seem like you've researched a lot and you have very strong views. And I only feel strongly about this. So I'm going to go along with that. The sway of strong personalities is incredible and it is very real. And I have seen more when I was clerking, because I can't interact with juries while I'm trying a case, where one person's view can essentially just break down a bunch of other people because they want to go home. It's the holidays. They're tired of being in there. They're like, I don't care that much, but you care a lot. So fine. That is a very real dynamic in jury rooms. We don't know that here. We haven't talked to any jurors. They do not have to talk. No one should be harassing the jurors. Let me be very clear about that. It is done. Doesn't matter, okay? So no one should be harassing these jurors. They never have to speak. If I were you guys, if you're listening to this, I would never speak to anyone if I were you. That would just be personal for me. Now, you may choose to do so because there's going to be a lot of interest in what you have to say. But if it were me, I would never want to speak about this because of the harassment that would come from it.
And I'll just say this. The other thing, maybe you think there was an FKR mole in the jury. Maybe you don't. But it is certainly the case that at least one juror knew a lot of information about this case. And you can see that from the jury questions. Jury question number 4, for instance, was if we find Karen Reed not guilty on 2 counts and hang on the other, can she be retried on all the counts? That's exactly what happened last time. And it's the legal fight that the defense had for months about that. And I think one of the things to remember, unlike most mistrials in cases which are hung juries, in cases which no one's paying attention to, we have hung juries. I was telling a story on Twitter, and I'll tell the story here because this happened because we had, the moment where Judge Cannoni says, well, we had a verdict, and then they came back and said we don't actually have a verdict. And in our office, there was a case, and I'll never forget, I was driving down the road, and I get a phone call, and they're like, hey, so we just had a jury come back, and they said guilty, and then the defendant broke down and started crying. And so the judge polled the jury, and one of the jurors just said, never mind, I'm not guilty. What do we do? Right? And it turned out, it was funny because I'm driving and my wife's sitting next to me. So she's doing the legal research for me. I'm telling her what to look for Turned out there was a rule that actually said exactly what you do in that circumstance. You can either have them go back and deliberate some more, or you can say there's a hung jury and just dismiss the jury. And it turned out they went back, and this guy, from that point forward, he was like, sorry, I'm not guilty. You're not going to get me to guilty. And they hung 11-1. Well, they retried that case. The new jurors had no idea there'd been a prior trial. Nobody had reported on that. It wasn't a big deal. It was a very simple, straightforward case, and they convicted, right? Well, that's not what happened here. These jurors knew there had been a prior trial, and they knew that 12 jurors, just like them, had come together, and according to public reporting at least, whether it's true or not, had found Karen Read not guilty on 2 of the counts and had hung on one of the others. They knew that. And you have to imagine that is influencing them as they're deliberating. Like, why are we so much smarter than those guys? Maybe they had a point, right? And I feel like that was another difficulty for the Commonwealth that was just going to be hard to overcome. So, a couple things about this. Number one, I just want to point out, because I think there is going to be a tendency among a lot of people to say, these jurors were idiots. These jurors are morons. They clearly didn't understand this, et cetera, particularly if you feel like an injustice was done here, and I understand that impulse. But I just want to point out that they were not alone. There were plenty of commentators and lawyers and former judges and everybody else on Twitter and television and everywhere else saying this too. So I don't think it is worthwhile to criticize the jury as somehow not intelligent. I do think that when you think about this case, you can be the change you want to see. I do think, and we've talked about this a lot, that understanding our system and civics and everything else and appreciating the way evidence should be weighed and what reasonable doubt means is really important. And as a society, and I don't care whether it's the jurors on this case or whether it was the talking heads talking about the case, they just don't understand it or they're willfully ignorant of it. You guys who are listening to this tend to understand it better, either because that's why you listen to us or we've had some effect. I would like to think we have. But either way, just remember this case in everything you do. Because it's easy. I mean, we all look at the Free Karen Read people and we judge them. We say, wow, what a bunch of crazy people. How did they fall for this? How are they in this cult? How did they get led along into believing this massive conspiracy happened? Well, this is a narrow slice of society and it's one issue, but we are all susceptible to that. In some aspect of our lives, we are susceptible to going along with something like this. And so I think one good thing you can take from this case is in your life, when you see something like this and you see a mob, which is what we had here, and really loud voices and really aggressive voices telling you that something wild and crazy and conspiratorial is happening, you may be inclined to believe that because of whatever, your background, your politics, your religion, where you're from, your prior experiences, whatever it is. Take a moment, step back, and think about whether or not what you're hearing is actually rational. Apply the same rational reasoning that you applied to this case to reach that Karen Read is guilty, despite these voices and despite this noise, and apply it to those areas of your life as well. And I think if you do that, it can be really valuable for you and really valuable for the world at large.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. What a silver lining, Brett. Way to go on the silver lining. But I think that's exactly right. And those of you who've been following us for 5 years, I mean, Legal Briefs has been fewer than 5 years, but we've been talking about this since day one. Go back. We've never changed our message. We said, we're trying to interpret for you what we see. These are our takes on the facts based on our legal training, based on our experience prosecuting cases, but don't take our word for it. Kind of like reading Rainbow. You know, go back and take a look in the book. We always say that. We post all of the trial transcripts, the briefs, and we say, go read it because the law is supposed to be accessible to everyone. And we've said that time and time again from literally our first episode before we even did a case, when we did the 10 rules of how we're going to do our podcast. We said, we're giving you our honest take. We have day jobs. This is not the way we feed our families, thankfully. And so we are free to truly look at this with the lens of, what does the law say about this? What do the rules of evidence say about this? What does our experience in investigating these cases, prosecuting these cases say? With that caveat, we're obviously going to have views based on where our background is coming from. You should take a look and see if you agree with us, because this entire civic world gets better if we can all look independently and use our common sense. Remember, much of the law in the United States is based on the reasonable person standard. That standard only works if you have reasonable people who are able to view the world with their own brains, right? Your reasonableness might be slightly different from mine, but if your view of reasonableness is whatever the masses and the mobs are saying, then we are toast. Because the way our common law system is written in the United States is a legal standard of the reasonable person. And it is all contingent on the fact that we are individuals who have God-given brains and the ability to think unlike others in creation, right? Like, I love dogs. Dogs do not serve on juries because they have not been given the ability to rationalize thoughts or speak English that I know of. If we lose that, absolutely, we completely lose the judicial system. We lose all of this, and that was how it was built. The safeguards in place are education, continued intelligent dialogue. You don't see us saying, go after the jurors, go after, no. Let's learn from this situation. Because if you guys listen to this trial, both trials, as we did, you heard the evidence, and you can analyze it for yourself. We need to all think, and we don't want people on this thread. There are people who disagree on this thread right now. Great. You are welcome to your thoughts, and you are welcome to not troll, but to have intelligent conversation. We welcome that. We've never kicked anyone out for alternate views on any of our cases, right? And a lot of people disagree with us, but I'm pleading with you that you and your brain is basically all that stands between us and tyranny, the tyranny of mob rule. And that is not an exaggeration. I mean, this is the Federalist Papers were like about the founding of our country, right? We recognize that this is an imperfect government and that we are governed by men who are not angels. That's in the Federalist Paper, what, 71? I forget. And because of that,
if men were angels, they would need no government.
It would need no government if we were angels. We are clearly not angels. But to further Pollyanna this, because it can be a grim day for those of us who think justice wasn't done. For some reason, the true crime world has truly leaned into this whole everyone. We hear this all the time. We have people on our show who say it, and we're okay with having people on our show who say this. They think that the majority of people in jail today are wrongfully convicted. That is incorrect statistically. The majority of people in jail today across the country in all jurisdictions are guilty of the crime for which they have been convicted or they pleaded guilty to. And I say that because this case, the fact that someone who was clearly guilty of the crime she was charged with was acquitted, should give you incredible confidence in our judicial system that we get it right much more than we get it wrong. And when we get it wrong, she's not the only one who's ever gotten off. In Casey Anthony, right? There are lots of other instances, and those are just the famous cases. There are many instances that are not reported, that are not the Karen Reeds of the judicial true crime world that you haven't heard of, where they are let go and the evidence clearly shows that they are the ones who did it. Or even more so, like I said earlier, we don't even prosecute a case because we think they did it and we're quite sure of it, but we may just not have enough evidence to be able to bring it to trial. So we don't, because we have sworn by the Constitution to only bring cases that we think can pass the reasonable doubt standard. So this should give you actually incredible confidence in our system, but at the same time, incredible fear that if you and I and all those that we interact with lose the ability to think independently, then pretty soon the entire judicial system will fall to tyranny.
And I also want to say, and I hope that all of this has been directed at this point, don't be depressed. You know, I've seen so many people say things like, I don't want to listen to true crime anymore. You know, I feel like I'm part of the problem. You know, true crime fed this. This is part of the reason. Like, all these people listening to true crime, and now all these people believe these irrational things. I will say two things about that. First of all, you are not alone. I know if you're watching Court TV, every poll you saw was like 80% not guilty. Those things are unscientific for a reason, because they're skewed to whoever's watching it. If you're on the gallery, it was 80% guilty. And I will tell you that when we, for instance, did our Instagram reel about Karen Reed being found not guilty, the vast majority of comments were like, what? How is that possible? So I know that the people who were in pink, who were surrounding that courthouse, are the loudest. You could hear them cheer when the verdict came out in the courtroom. I know they're loud, and I know they can be obnoxious, but they are not the majority, and you are not alone. There are plenty of people who agree with you on what reasonable doubt means, on what justice is, and why truth is important. So don't let this get you down. We need you in this fight. We need people to go out and make these points and argue for truth and fight for truth and be a voice for victims like John. So don't be depressed. The other thing I will say is, remember, as we've always told you, we're not going to tell you who to listen to or who not to listen to. That is your decision. But remember how valuable your time is. It is the most valuable thing you have. And who you choose to give it to is important. There were plenty of people who looked at the Karen Read case and said, you know what, I just don't see it. I have reasonable doubt. I feel like the state did a poor job proving this case. I have real problems with the state police. I have concerns about Trooper Proctor. I don't think the investigation was well done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those people, you know what? I disagree with them. That's fine. They're just on the other side of the issue, and that's fine. And I would never tell you not to listen to those people. But people who put Aidan Kearney front and center, people who platformed him, people who gave him a voice, despite all of the things he has done, those people you should look askance at. And you should think seriously about whether or not you want to give your valuable time to support that, because this is a circle. It's a big feedback loop. And if that's what makes money, and if it's what brings in views, there are people who will take that position, whether they believe it or not, because it's what they need to do for their job, because this is their job. This is how they put food on the table. And they're worried about views, and they're worried about likes, and they're worried about engagement, and they need it. And if you tell them the way to get those things is to do this, that's what they're going to do. So just remember that. And I realize I'm preaching to the choir, but a hate listen is still a listen. We love hate listens.
Hello to all of you who hate us.
Yes,
I bet about
you guys
like
are
10%
awesome.
of you here are hate listens. Welcome.
And that's fine.
You are always welcome here.
The more the merrier. I mean, it's fine if all of you hate us, right?
Right.
But just remember that. And it's important. And as we move forward, and as I think this medium will be more and more influential, as you saw in this case, it's even more important to just remember how important you are. Each one of you is so important. And remember that when you're deciding where to give your time to.
There's so much more that could be said, but I'm not sure I want to say much more, to be completely honest.
I have one more thing to say, and then I'll be done. Because I do think this is important. And this will not be said, but I want to say it. And that's just a simple thank you. A thank you to Hank Brennan, to Adam Lally, Mr. Lally, to Katie McLaughlin, to Chris Albert, to Julie Albert, to Nicole Albert, to Chloe, to Brian Albert and Brian Albert Jr., Caitlin Albert, Colin Albert, Jen McCabe, Allie McCabe, Matt McCabe, Trooper Buhinick, Firefighter Nettle. These are all people who tried to get justice for John O'Keefe. Some of them knew him. Some of them didn't know him at all. Carrie Roberts. Some of them tried to help Karen Read in her moment of need on that day that was the worst day of her life, when she saw the man she loved laying in the snow, dying. Carrie Roberts and Jim McCabe were right there with her. And those people suffered immensely. They were called liars. They were called perjurers. They were called murderers, simply because they wanted to help John, and in some cases, Karen Read. And those people deserve some recognition, because they are victims in this case. They are victims of Karen Read, and they are victims of this defense, and they should not be forgotten. And I hope you'll remember all of them when you think about this case going forward.
And two really quick things. Yes, the defense has a job. They're always trying to get their client the best deal, shall we say. And that's an acquittal in this case. We've already said that just because there's an acquittal, that's not the truth of what happened that night. The truth is the truth no matter what, right? You and I probably don't even know the exact truth, and that's okay. The second thing is, there's a way to be vigorous advocates for the criminal defendant that does not involve fabricating entire conspiracy that ruins other people's lives. So there was a way for Karen Read's defense to go about this in a way that was not this. And I say that because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to take the same playbook and run with it with different types of cases. This is not the way for vigorous advocacy. This was something altogether different. This is what I will end with. This is not the last Karen Read case. I don't mean Karen Read. Karen Read, this case, over. No double jeopardy. This has gone away. Don't spend another minute thinking about it, honestly, except lessons you can learn from here. The cult and the mob and the conspiracy theories, they're just going to move on to the next case. Okay? So this is lightning in a bottle, but this lightning is going to then catch into another bottle of another case and another case and another case. And I say this because all of the learnings we're taking from this, take it to the next case, the next type of FKR type of case. It's going to happen again. This is not that special. It's happened before in other types of cases. And we have a good idea where this lightning is going to jump to for the next bottle. Don't follow it, right? TV, YouTube commentators, they're looking for the next case just like this. They've probably already found it, right? And I wish I could say, well, this is over. This is never going to happen again. But we've seen this happen too many times, and it's just human nature to kind of repeat. Nothing under the sun is new. Ecclesiastes, here we are again. And just be aware of that. So as whatever emotions you're feeling tonight, whether it's elation, whether it's disappointment, have your eyes opened. Examine what has happened here. Examine your role in it and where you fall, why you think what you think. And don't be a sheep as this type of mob mentality moves on to the next true crime case. And of course, as always, as we always say, true crime is true. There are real people involved. We would be better consumers of true crime if we kept that at the forefront of our mind. We're always going to be interested in these types of cases, and I don't think that's wrong in and of themselves. But to treat this like pure entertainment Hollywood, where it doesn't affect real life, is just wrong. It's incorrect. And so, thank you for following along with this. You know, we've covered the case twice now, 2 different trials, and we are really thankful for the wonderful discussion that we've been able to see happen among people who disagree. And today is just one of those days. We view this when we're prosecutors. There are days that you lose. And I think this is a day where justice did not win. And it's okay to be sad about that.
Yeah, and I'll say this. The man who hired both of us is a fantastic prosecutor, a legend, and a very wise person. And when prosecutors would lose a case, he would always say a couple things. And one of them was, you should learn from it, figure out what went wrong so you can hopefully get a better outcome next time. But losing is not necessarily the worst thing. The worst thing is not bringing the hard cases. It's not pursuing justice because you're afraid. And I think, there were people who thought the Commonwealth shouldn't have brought this case because it was hard. And I don't think so. I think John O'Keefe, his death cried out for justice. And it deserved this. And I am thankful for both these trials because I do think there are people who believed the whole conspiracy. All they had heard was the talk, and then they heard the evidence and they were convinced otherwise. And I think that's a good thing. And it didn't result in the outcome we wanted, but that is our justice system. And this is, and just to reiterate, this is how it works, guys. You can't have a justice system that is designed not to put innocent people in prison without some guilty people getting off. Like, you just can't do it. So, I get the disappointment, but don't let this make you think, well, the jury system's terrible. We need professional jurors. As I said earlier, there were plenty of professionals who were far more into the Karen Read conspiracy than this jury might have been. So don't think that would change anything. And just the last thing I'll say is say a prayer for John O'Keefe's family. Say a prayer for those kids. They've gone through hell. They lost both their parents. Then they lost John. Then they were put through this. And now they have to move on with their lives. It's 17 years old, 15 years old, or however old they are. Those are the people you should be thinking about tonight. So say a prayer.
Well, thank you guys for following along. Thank you for continuing to make our justice system better just by being good civic leaders, educating yourself, listening to different viewpoints, and also reading things in the first instance. Let's read more than just tweets. Let's read books, articles, challenge yourself to that. And I'm sure we will keep talking about this somewhere, but not tonight. I don't know. Do we want to do questions just to break it up?
Let's do a question. Why not? Let's do a question. What's the next case you're going to cover?
Yet.
See you in Idaho.
I haven't cut out yet.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what it is. It was the USB-C thing.
And I'll say
it's not
this,
get fixed.
Just as we're sort of like, I got caught up in this case after the first case more than I should have. It became a little bit, I enjoy the trolls. I'm not going to lie. I do. I enjoy the back and forth with them. I do. And after the first trial, it became a little bit more of like a game, even for me. And I'm going to try and avoid that going forward just because it's not a good way to be. And as much as I enjoy it, I think it's not the best thing to do. So I'm going to try and stay more even-keeled for Kohberger. It was just once you heard all the evidence in the first trial, it's like, what are we even doing here? You know? So anyway, so I've learned a lesson from this as well.
What?
You won't see
did
me
everyone
as fiery.
just hear?
That's
Did
probably not
everyone just hear Brett say, "Alice, you're right. You
I mean, I
shouldn't
say
give in to
that,
the trolls."
but is it true?
Wait. Shh. I think
I'll
my
say
microphone
this.
is a little off. My microphone's a little off. I think I heard it. Wait, Alice, you're
Well,
right.
I'll say
Yes,
this
I
other
should
thing.
be more like
the other
you.
thing I'll say is, all these people out there are like, I want to hear from Alice. I bet she's much more reasonable than Brett. And I'm thinking, if Alice was on here, you people wouldn't be able to stand up anymore when she got done with it. You think I'm the unreasonable one? Good Lord. You should talk to her. Yeah, I hear what she says when she's not on air.
I was going to say, you should see my text to Brett. Let's be very clear. Our tweets are our tweets. And you can listen to this podcast to know what we both think. Thanks, y'all, for standing up for the little lady, but we're okay here.
Absolutely. Okay, let's see. All right. So this is a very legal briefs question. It just came in, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyways, because I feel like, since we're talking about trial, this is from Bryce, who may or may not be in the chat right now. But what happens if a witness dies on the stand?
Oh, on the stand.
And look, there were a couple defense witnesses in the Karen Reed trial that I was kind of worried they might not make it off the stand, if you know what I mean. But none of them actually perished in the middle of their testimony. So what happens if a witness dies on the stand? I don't know that this has ever happened, but I think there's an obvious answer. What do you think, Alice?
I was going to be smart aleck about it. You should give a real answer.
Well, I
was
love
going to be
hear
a smart
your
aleck and said, you don't touch them because they're still under oath.
Yeah, that would break the rule of sequestration.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. I was like, don't touch them. Not my problem.
Okay. So the answer is most likely a mistrial. I think a mistrial is what would happen if a witness died on the stand. I think the judge would probably be like, I mean, I guess if it was but even if it was a relatively minor witness, it would be such a traumatic event for everybody. It would be so
traumatic.
I think you would need to have a mistrial. Now,
I think we had a
interesting question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And not to say that question isn't interesting, Bryce, but here's an interesting question. So one of the exceptions to hearsay is testimony given in a prior hearing. So if they died on the stand, how much of their testimony would you be able to use in the next trial? Because they would be unavailable.
I would say all of it. I would say all of it. I would even say within the same trial. Let's say they previously testified and they hadn't finished their testimony. So they had testified at, the preliminary hearing or something, and that they died on the stand, but they were not finished. There's still like a lot of information. I think you get to play it because they're witness unavailable. You could become unavailable in between, because I've actually had a witness who fell incredibly ill and was in the hospital.
So they almost died on the stand.
They almost died on the stand, but yeah.
And I'll just do, I think that's the answer. I think Alice is right. I think most of it. Now, one question would be, usually it needs to be cross-examined. So I think there would be a question of, are we on direct? Are we on cross-examination? If we're on cross-examination, how much is being crossed? Are we on redirect, et cetera, et cetera? So it'd actually be a really interesting legal question if something like that were to happen. But honestly, now that Alice mentions it, I bet there has been a case where someone died between days. I mean,
or fell into a coma or something. Right?
Like in the Karen Reed case, you had people who were on trial or on the stand for a week. They could have got hit by a bus, just died. It's a very stressful situation. You can imagine all sorts of things happening. So
we've had certain cases where we had old witnesses that I was like, we got to go to trial because this person's not making it to next year. and that's not said lightly, but truthfully.
One thing you can do in that situation, if you really do have a witness who is on death's doorstep, and this has happened before. Seems like I remember a Dateline about this. You can depose a witness on their deathbed with the defense attorney there, subject to cross-examination, and use that testimony later on.
What a terrible way to die. My last hour of life, I'm being cross-examined, but you're right about that.
I'm almost positive there was a Dateline. I feel like the woman had been burned to death. I may be making this up. Did you cover this in one of your other podcasts?
No, I didn't. But I faced a request to have a dying deposition when I was a law clerk, and we found that the person wasn't actually near death.
That makes sense. So we didn't grant it.
which is
Yeah.
very important because then otherwise you just want to do it. And they were in the hospital. We had a whole hearing about it. We had the doctors come and talk about how sick they were. And it was not like an old age situation. It was like kind of like a burn victim sort of situation. And the person, by the way, they were not on death's doorstep. So there could not be this type of a deposition. And that person, in fact, recovered actually miraculously quickly.
Yeah, isn't it
after
weird
the
how that
ruling.
happens? Yeah. The other thing, I'll just answer a sua sponte question from the chat. Can the defense be held accountable? So anything they say in court is immune from lawsuit. So you can defame someone as much as you want to, essentially, in court, and you cannot be sued for it. So like all that stuff about Brian Higgins, which, was funny. In the first trial, it was Colin Albert who did this, right? And we had the bloody knuckles, and everybody who supported Karen Reed believed that Colin was waiting in the basement with the dog. There was some disagreement over grass. The rest of the family got John O'Keefe to go downstairs. There was this fight. It turned into sort of an accidental death. Colin punched John. He fell, hit his head on the back of the weight bench, and he died. And everybody believed that. That was the story. Well, then the judge said, you can't bring up Colin Albert. No basis for that, for the sum of the dude did it defense. And now everybody believes it was Higgins. Higgins did it. He hit him with his plow, or he beat him up because he wanted Karen Reed so badly that he had to kill John O'Keefe. And there's video of him in the police department. And it's like, I get that this is the pivot the defense has to make for the purpose of their case, but it's weird to see all of these people on Twitter who support Karen Reed, who now just on a dime, because of an evidentiary decision by the judge, deeply believe that it was Higgins and not Colin Albert. It's just so funny to see that switch. And it's like, guys, you realize you've just fallen for this. This is not like about truth. It's about getting her off, which is their job. But your job is to think about reality. But either way, neither Higgins nor Albert could sue for anything that was said in court. Now, anything said outside of court, that's a different story. Any interviews that were given, any statements on the courthouse steps, anything like that, you would have to argue that it was somehow part of your representation to avoid legal responsibility for that.
And you understand, policy-wise, this is, again, the whole tension of how much free speech, how much we want to have vigorous defense. When it's for evidentiary purposes, we don't want to hamper anyone's ability to vigorously defend themselves. All right. Well, thank you guys for these questions. I hope that you have learned something today. You can also ask a question if you leave a 5-star review for either of our podcasts, but the Legal Briefs line question is much shorter. So if you want your question answered sooner, see, Bryce just asked this question and the question was answered today. You can go leave a 5-star review and we will answer your question. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
Sophie, what do you want? Goodness. Sophie, what do you want? Goodness gracious. You make a shirt and all of a sudden you get to answer all your questions.
Mine is coming. It's just not here yet.
Do we know if her OU, I don't know. People have called it a misdemeanor. Somebody said that she could get up to 2 years for it, though, which would mean it was a felony. But I don't know, and it doesn't matter. Who cares?
Yeah, whatever. It's over.
She got 1 year
It's
probation. So.
Hey, we kind of figured this out. Okay, I probably will need a new computer just for the input part.
I think we should just go ahead and I think we should up all our Patreon tiers to $20 a month.
No, we're not going to charge people more money
And
so I
buy
can
our
get a computer that works.
If Bob Ruff can get his people to build him a shed, we can get
A
computers.
shit.
This summer, Pluto TV is exploding with thousands of free movies. Summer of cinema is here. Feel the explosive action all summer long with movies like Gladiator, Mission Impossible, Beverly Hills Cop, Good Burger, and Transformers: Dark of the Moon. Bring the action with you and stream for free from all your favorite devices. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.